The sky was still pale when I stepped off the bus with the pie carefully wrapped in foil. It was the same recipe Brad used to beg me for when he was little brown, sugar, cinnamon, no cloves. I had baked it the night before, wrapped it twice, and held it on my lap the whole ride to Westford. His street was quiet. I walked the last block slowly, the chill biting through my coat. When I reached the porch, I fixed my hair in the reflection of the glass and pressed the doorbell. Footsteps. Then the door swung open. Brad stood there, mouth slightly parted, eyes widening not with joy, but something colder. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of the table set for dinner. Soft music playing, a small girl giggling in the distance. Emma. Before I could smile, Kimberly appeared over his shoulder. "Why is she here?" she hissed, not bothering to lower her voice. Brad shifted his weight. "Mom," he said, tone clipped. "You can't just show up like this. It's not a good time." I thought I started holding the pie out like a peace offering. He didn't take it. "This is only for family," he said. "Please leave." I looked at him, really looked, and saw a stranger in my son's face. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for a plate or a minute or a hug. I turned, walked down the steps, and kept walking. The pie was still warm. The foil crinkled in my arms. Behind me, the door clicked shut. I reached the corner before I let myself blink away the sting. I hadn't even made it through the threshold, not past the front rug, not even a hello. By the time I reached the motel, the pie had gone cold. The motel room smelled faintly of old carpet and disinfectant, but it was warm, and that was enough for the moment. I set the pie on the small table by the window, the foil still smooth and unbroken. I told myself I'd eat a slice once I felt steadier, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling, so I sat on the edge of the bed instead. Brad's voice replayed in my mind, stripped of everything except the sharpness. "This is only for family." I'd heard raised voices before, but never his, never directed at me. I closed my eyes, hoping the words would fade if I breathed deeply enough. They didn't. The room felt too quiet. I reached for my phone, half expecting to see at least one message, a question, an apology, anything. The screen lit up blank. No missed calls, no voicemail, nothing from Brad, nothing from Emma or Jack, not that they had phones, but I imagined them asking where I was. Imagined them wondering why I didn't come. I opened the social media app I rarely used. It felt foolish, but I needed to see something familiar. The first photo that appeared was a long dining table covered in food. At the center were Emma and Jack wearing matching autumn sweaters, laughing. Kimberly's mother sat beside them, lifting a glass toward the camera. I kept scrolling until a comment pinned me in place. "Missing Grandma Alder this year. Wish she were still with us." My breath caught. Still with us. As if I were gone. As if I'd been gone long enough that people spoke about me in the past tense. I reread the line, then looked back at Emma's smile in the picture. There was no empty chair beside her. No place card with my name. Nothing to suggest anyone had expected me or wanted me or even remembered I existed. A strange numbness washed through me. Not shock, not anger. Just a quiet sinking. Somewhere between the last birthday I'd attended and today, my name had been swept out of their household, like dust. I closed the phone and looked at the untouched pie, wondering when the erasing had begun, and how far it had already reached as I reached for my coat. I didn't sleep much. The heater groaned through the night, and every time I drifted off, I dreamed of knocking at Brad's door at a window, even at Emma's school. Always knocking, never being let in. I finally gave up at dawn boiled water from the motel sink and made a bitter cup of instant coffee. The pie was still there untouched. I pulled my travel bag onto the bed and unzipped the side pocket. Inside was a worn green folder. I hadn't opened in years. I spread it out in front of me like a deck of old cards, deeds, tax returns, letters from the bank. paperwork Brad never cared to ask about. He always assumed it was all handled, and it was. By me. One sheet in particular, yellowed at the edges, showed the structure of the educational trust I'd set up for Emma and Jack when they were born. It wasn't large, but it was solid. I'd worked for every dollar, stashing away birthday money dividends interest. I'd kept the account quiet, letting Brad manage it, but only as a trustee. The kind of trust that required oversight. Mine. I tore a page from the motel notepad and wrote 3 names in ink. Mr. Denham, my attorney, for over 20 years. Brad underlined once. Emma underlined twice. The phone only rang once before Denham answered. "Maris," he said, same measured tone as always. "It's been a while. I need to move the deed," I said, "and I want to restrict the withdrawals from the trust." There was a brief pause. Not confusion, just a moment of respect. "It's still in your name," he said. "You never signed over control. Just say the word." I looked out the window toward the gray parking lot, then back down at the folder. I could hear Emma's laugh from the video clip the night before echoing where my name used to be. "I'm saying it now," I replied. He said he'd draw up the paperwork. I folded the file closed and reached for my coat again. The bus to Westford left in 20 minutes, and I had one more place to visit. The bus ride to the lake was quiet, mostly back roads and bare trees flashing past the window. I held the folder on my lap the whole way, fingers curled around the edge like it might slip out of reach if I let go. When I stepped onto the porch of the cabin, I had to clear away the leaves myself. No one else ever came out this far. I kept it clean, paid the taxes, handled the plumbing last spring when the pipes froze. Brad used to say it wasn't worth the drive. Too small, too quiet, but it had been meant for him. That was always the plan. It was supposed to be his after college, after marriage, after the kids. A place to breathe, somewhere they could come for summers. He'd thanked me once long ago when I showed him the deed. He never asked how I managed it. Never asked how the college fund stayed afloat, despite their expenses growing like vines. He didn't know I worked Saturdays at the library well past retirement, or that I sold my engagement ring during the housing crisis just to keep things afloat. He didn't ask and I didn't tell. That was our rhythm. Inside the cabin, nothing had changed. The same lace curtains, the same dented kettle, the same photo shelf on the mantel. I reached for the frame on the far end. Emma, 3 years old, standing on the dock in a yellow sweater. Her cheeks puffed with cold. That sweater had taken me 3 weeks to finish. She used to call it her sun coat. That was before Kimberly took over the photo albums, before the word grandma started belonging to someone else online. I'd seen the captions. "Thankful for Grandma's cooking. Grandma's lap is the best place to nap." All beneath photos of Kimberly's mother, smiling like she'd earned the title. I held the picture closer. My stitches were there, row by row. Proof that I had been part of something once. I set it back on the shelf, not because it didn't matter, but because I still knew where it belonged. Outside, the wind shifted. I locked the door and turned toward town. There was one more place I needed to stop before the day was done. By the time I reached Westford Elementary, the morning had softened into a low, pale light that made the brick building look almost gentle. Children were still filing in through the side entrance, backpacks, bouncing voices bright in the cold air. I stayed back until the flow thinned, then walked up the front steps and pushed open the glass door. The front office was warm and smelled faintly of pencils and cafeteria rolls. A woman with neatly pinned hair sat behind the counter, sorting permission slips into piles. I cleared my throat softly. "Can I help you?" she asked, friendly but brisk. I gave her my maiden name for the donation form, Maurice Alder, the name I hadn't used in decades, but felt steadier than my married one right now. She typed it in, then paused, her eyes widening. "Oh," she said slowly, a smile tugging at her mouth. "So you're that Alder?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure what you mean." She laughed lightly. Emma mentioned you once. Said she used to have a grandma named Maris, but she wasn't sure if she'd imagined her, because no one ever talked about her. Kids say the funniest things. The words landed like a soft blow, not sharp, but hollow. I nodded, not trusting myself to answer right away. I slid the donation envelope across the counter. There's something else I'd like to leave, I said, pulling a second envelope from my coat. Inside were printed photos from birthdays, past a few letters I'd written but never sent, and a single drawing Emma made when she was 5. 2 stick figures holding hands beside a wobbly blue house. She had written our names at the top in crooked letters, Emma plus Grandma. The clerk accepted it gently. We can put this in her classroom mailbox. Thank you, I said, stepping back. That's all I needed. I walked out before she could say anything more. Outside, the cold felt sharper, but I breathed it in anyway. I wasn't sure if Emma remembered my voice or my stories, but she remembered enough to draw us together once, and that was something. I pulled my coat tighter and headed toward the bus stop, already knowing my next call would change more than donations ever could. The call came just after 9, when the house had finally settled into its usual nighttime quiet. I had just finished folding the motel blanket when my phone lit up with Kimberly's name. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But I answered. Her voice came sharp and fast. How dare you go near Emma's school? Do you have any idea how inappropriate that was? I held the phone steady. I dropped off a donation. And some photos. I didn't speak to her. That's not the point, she snapped. You're causing confusion. You're disrupting her routine. I let a breath slip out. Disrupting, I repeated. By existing. By letting her know she didn't imagine me. There was a pause. Brief, but telling. You knew I'd find out, Kimberly said. You're trying to get between us. No, I said quietly. I'm trying to remind my granddaughter that she didn't invent a grandmother out of thin air. Which makes me wonder, what exactly have you told them about me? Silence. Then a tight exhale. They don't need to know about you, she said, voice lower now. It's confusing enough already. That's not confusion, I said. That's control. The line stayed still for 3 seconds. Maybe she expected me to apologize. Maybe she thought I'd back down or cry or beg. I didn't give her the chance. I hung up first. For a long moment, I stood by the small motel window and watched the cars rolling past on the highway. Their headlights swept across the cracked parking lot, each beam cutting briefly through the dark. It made something inside me feel clearer, sharper. I picked up my phone again and scrolled to Denham's number. He answered on the second ring. It's me, I said. I want everything moved to Emma. On paper. In full. He didn't ask what had happened or why my voice sounded steadier than it had in days. All right, he said. We'll start in the morning. I set the phone down, folded the last of the blanket, and began packing my bag for the next step I already knew I was going to take. 3 days passed. I kept to myself. Read an old mystery novel in the quiet hours, drank motel coffee that tasted like burnt air. Denham called twice to confirm signatures and account routing. It all moved quickly. The more I said yes, the more the old knots inside me began to loosen. Then Brad showed up. I heard the knock before I saw him. Firm, sharp, familiar in its impatience. I opened the door slowly. He stood there in a coat I'd bought him years ago, taller than I remembered, face red from the cold and from something else. Kimberly's a wreck, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. You can't just go behind our backs like this. I stayed quiet, motioned toward the chair. He didn't sit. She says you're trying to stir things up. Confuse the kids, make her look like the bad guy. She doesn't need my help with that, I said gently. His jaw tightened. This drama. It's not good for Emma. I walked to the side table, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the folder I'd packed days ago. I laid it flat on the table and flipped to the second page. "This is the trust agreement," I said. "The one you signed when Emma was born." His brows pulled together. "What does that have to do with anything I tapped 2 clauses with my finger? This one says funds are to be used exclusively for education-related expenses. This one requires that any major withdrawal be disclosed in writing. You never did that." He went still. "You're no longer Trustee Brad," I said. "It's been reassigned. Legally. Permanently. You can't." "I can." And I did. He stared at the document like it had betrayed him, like the lines on the page had rearranged while he wasn't looking. "That fund was meant for Emma," I said, voice steady. "Not for flights. Not for private gifts. And certainly not to buy my silence." He didn't speak again. I closed the folder, stood and opened the door behind him. He didn't move at first. But then he stepped out wordless, and I shut it gently behind him, just as I had years ago when he left for college. Only this time, the goodbye was mine. The cold settled in that week, the kind that made windows sweat from the inside. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and signed each document slowly, letting the weight of each decision press into the paper. The cabin by the lake mine, in name mine in memory, was the first to go. I donated it to a nonprofit that helps women aging out of the foster system. I asked Denham to include one small clause in the deed that Emma could visit and stay anytime, no notice needed. He raised an eyebrow when I said it, but didn't question me. He just added the language and handed me the pen. I updated my will the next day. It was simple. Everything I had, everything that hadn't already been reassigned, went to Emma. Not through Brad, not through Kimberly. Directly to her when she came of age. I left no room for ambiguity. But I did leave one envelope addressed to Brad. Inside were copies of every withdrawal he made from the Educational Trust. Labeled, dated, highlighted. The laptop for his office. The vacation in Cancun. The tuition receipt for a child who wasn't Emma. None of it matched the intent he once promised me. I didn't leave a note inside. There was nothing more to say. It wasn't anger that fueled me. I had no desire to punish. It was just the clarity that comes when you stop asking to be seen and start seeing yourself again. For the first time in years, my name stood clearly on every line. Not hidden, not erased, not softened to keep peace in a house that never felt like mine. I sealed the envelope, set it aside, and leaned back in my chair as snow began to collect along the windowsill. A knock would come again someday. Maybe from Emma, maybe not. I wasn't waiting for it. But I would be ready, just in case. 2 weeks before Christmas, when the days felt short enough to fold into a single breath, a small envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. The handwriting wobbled the letters, leaning as if unsure of their balance. I carried it inside, set my gloves on the table, and opened it carefully, afraid the paper might tear. Inside was a single card, the kind sold in packs of 10 at a drugstore. A snowman on the front, lopsided and smiling. I opened it and saw the handwriting again, shaky, uneven, unmistakably a child's. "Dear Grandma Maris, I found your letters. I showed them to Jack. Can we see the lake someday? Love, Emma." I read it once, then again, and again until the words no longer swam in front of me. At the bottom, written in green crayon, was my name. Grandma. Large, confident, underlined twice. I hadn't heard that word in so long, not directed at me, not spoken aloud, but seeing it on paper felt stronger than any embrace. I sat down, slowly letting the warmth of the moment settle over me. She'd found my letters. Not one, not two found, which meant she had gone looking, carefully, quietly, without permission. I pictured her sitting cross-legged somewhere in that house, opening envelopes not meant to be opened, reading words not meant to be read, except they were meant for her all along. And Jack. Sweet Jack. She'd shown him too. Some truths move on their own timetable. I held the card to my chest, not out of sentiment, but recognition. Something had passed through whatever walls Brad and Kimberly built, something small, persistent, and honest. Emma had reached through the dark and pulled a thread loose. I placed the card beside the folder of documents, the two lying side by side like pieces of a story finally touching. I didn't write back. Not yet. Mail in that house had a way of disappearing. Instead, I stood put on my coat and walked outside toward the road. Snow was beginning to fall soft and sure, and I knew exactly where I needed to go next. I placed Emma's card on the cabin mantel just above the old photo of her in the yellow sweater. The green crayon bled a little from the paper's edge, but the word was clear. Grandma. It didn't need framing. Its presence was enough. The air inside the cabin smelled faintly of cinnamon and sugar. I had baked the same pie from Thanksgiving, but this time, it wasn't for anyone else. No silver-plated server. No extra place setting. Just one plate, one fork, and a slice for myself. I sat at the table with the window open slightly, letting the scent drift out into the trees. The lake was still. It always was this time of year. The surface held the sky like a mirror, gray and steady, waiting. The kind of quiet that made you feel like the world could hear your thoughts if you weren't careful. I liked that about this place. It asked nothing but your presence. As night fell, I lit a single candle in the window. The porch light was already on. I'd replaced the bulb last week, just in case. A small gesture maybe, but it mattered to me. A light that said, someone is here. A light that said, come in if you need. I didn't know when Emma would come. Maybe not this season. Maybe not until the summer or years from now, when she had her own questions and no one left to lie to her. But she'd written. She'd remembered. She'd asked, and that was enough for now. The pie was warm, the lake calm, and my name belonged to me again. I pulled the blanket over my knees, picked up my book, and turned the page where I'd left off, right where the story starts to shift, quietly, just before everything opens.